Welcome to Calaveras Behind the Badge, where our commitment to community engagement, transparency, and open dialogue takes center stage. I'm Greg Stark, Lieutenant with the Calaveras County Sheriff's Office, Public Information Officer, and your host as we explore the challenges we face and the role of law enforcement. So whether you're tuning in during your morning commute, at home, or on a hike through our beautiful county, we're glad you're with us. Let's get started. In today's episode, we're diving into Special Weapons and Tactics Teams, commonly known as SWAT. With me today is Calaveras County SWAT Team Commander, Lieutenant Kevin Stevens. So welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So before we get going, I think it's important for the listeners to maybe have a little bit of historical background or understand who they're listening to during our podcast. So go ahead and share a little about your background.
Yeah, again, my name's Kevin Stevens. I started working here at Calaveras County Sheriff's Office in 2005. Originally, I come from the Bay Area. I grew up in that area and went into the military right after high school. When I got out of the armed forces, I finished up my college, put myself through the basic law enforcement academy, and soon after I got hired here at Calaveras County.
What made you come to Calaveras?
Well, at the time, again, back in 2005, the law enforcement field was not wide open. It was actually pretty competitive trying to find jobs. So the what we called the RTOs, the recruit training officers in the academy, basically told all of us, hey, put out your applications and don't be picky and go, wherever you get hired. And if you want to move around after that, at least you'll have a little bit of experience in your belt. So really, I had no experience in Calaveras County. I came here because they were, again, hired me right out of the academy. And since being here, I fell in love with the place very quickly, liked working here, liked the area, purchased a home here in the county, and never had the feeling to ever want to move or start somewhere else.
So once we got our hooks into you, kind of stayed with us for the whole time. Yeah,
absolutely. I fell in love with the county right away. And, what I like to do on a personal level aligns with the county, with the ruralness of it. And, working at the office here, it's just been nothing but a great experience. So I stuck around.
So right now you're the lieutenant in charge of patrol operations at, all patrol activities, all the squads and, graveyard day shift. What are some of your special or former special assignments or special teams that you've been a part of?
Yeah. So after, working basic patrol for a while, back in 2006, I was chosen to go to the narcotics unit. We called it CNU back then, the Calaveras Narcotics Enforcement Unit. I stayed in that unit for a couple of years. I was promoted to a corporal, which is a training officer. Spent a number of years training new deputies. I did a stint in detectives after that. I worked in special enforcement team, and of course the SWAT team, which we're talking about today. Beyond that, I think I've done a little bit of time in most of the main units, but SWAT has been the main.
So when you're talking about some of the main units, you're a detective for a while, and then you actually went back as a detective sergeant for a little bit before being promoted to lieutenant. And during that, your formal training, part of that time you're with the SWAT team. So being able to be on the ground level of, developing, search warrants or, creating tactical plans is, kind of a key point to have a person of your experience in some of those key positions. So you mentioned that you became a SWAT team member sometime during your career. Go ahead and talk about the journey of your SWAT team career all the way up to being the commander of the team, and maybe explain what some of the commander duties are.
Yes, actually getting onto a SWAT team was kind of the driving force of pursuing law enforcement following both my military and college years. After the military, I was going to Chico State up north full time, and I really missed the military, a lot of aspects of teamwork, having a common goal and people oriented towards the same thing. For a long time, I thought about going back into the service as an officer, but those years I spent most of my military overseas, and I missed home. So the next best option for me was law enforcement, And ever since I was a kid, I was, pretty drawn to specialized teams like SWAT and military units. It was the driving force. I got into the academy, and once I started working here, as soon as I was eligible to get on the team, I did the tryout, got on as what we call the new guys, which is basically I know we'll get into the training aspect of it, but once you make it through that pipeline, you get onto what we call the entry team. And I served on the basic entry team for a number of years. Then I was selected to become a scout sniper on the team. Again, I did that for a number of years, and I was shortly after that selected to become a assistant team leader. Or an element leader. We start controlling a group of the team during various operations. After a few years of that, I was selected as the team leader. Again, same thing, but kind of on a more major level of leadership on the overall team. And I stayed in that position for pretty much the last 8 years or so. And then after making lieutenant, I was selected to become the commander of the team.
So we talk about the team. This is a part-time team, correct? Where it's not a full-time team where you come to work and you do, SWAT every day, all day. It's a part-time team. Is that correct?
That's correct. Part-time team. Everybody on the team comes from different areas in the sheriff's office, but yes, we all have our main positions in the department, and it's an ancillary duty as a SWAT team member.
So coming out of the military, looking for that, the team aspect, the common goal you talked about. What was your duties in the military?
I was a military police officer.
So you had some idea of what law enforcement was and the application of laws and to those you serve. So that kind of translates to, does that translate to civilian law enforcement?
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, they also had what they called SRT teams, a special response team, as a component of the military police, which is very similar to a SWAT team, which I was a member of for a number of years as well.
Okay, so SWAT team. What are the primary responsibilities of a SWAT team, and how do they differ from regular law enforcement duties? There seems to be maybe either a misconception of, what SWAT does as compared to why do we need SWAT as compared to like a regular patrol deputy or patrol element.
Right. So again, SWAT, the acronym, Special Weapons and Tactics, is a designated group of officers that are specially selected, trained, and equipped to undertake, certain tasks, emergencies, critical incidents that are beyond the training and scope of your basic patrol officers. That could be equipment needs or specialized training needs.
Gotcha. So when you talk about critical incident that exceed the basic capabilities of patrol, give me a couple of examples, like for instance.
Well, for instance, a main one would be a hostage incident. This is a very dynamic environment and a very difficult one to bring to a successful and hopefully peaceful close. It requires specialized training and equipment. So
something that is maybe low frequency, high risk situations that the regular patrol deputy this does maybe not be equipped through weapons, with having the correct tactics or even the weapons to overcome what they have in front of them.
Correct.
So do you know any of the history of the team in Calaveras, how it got started, or even history of SWAT teams in either America or California?
Yeah, a quick summary. You can look back to 1966. The incident at the University of Texas, I believe the subject's name was Charles Whitman. He was up in the clock tower of the university with a high-powered rifle and unfortunately killed a number of people and wounded many more. That incident, it was kind of the main incident that people will look to as the start of SWAT teams. Either that year or the year before, we had the Watts riots down in L.A. Again, created a number of incidents that were just way out of control and out of the scope of your frontline street officers. And it was at the time Daryl Gates. He did turn out to be the chief of Los Angeles Police Department. kind of came up with the concept and put together the first operating teams in the late 60s. And that's how the SWAT teams got created. And from that point on, departments across the country started to take notice and mimic what he had created. And, there's a lot of incidents in recent times that really increased the number, such as the Hollywood bank robbery. Many people will probably be aware of that incident where two heavily armed robbers took over a bank in Hollywood, California. And there was just a massive shootout where they outgunned the officers. As a matter of fact, officers had to go into a local gun store in the neighborhood to get weapons to counter the two suspects.
Yeah, so not only were they outgunned, so to speak, for the law enforcement or the basic law enforcement on scene, but I believe they also had body armor, which was another layer of, suspects heightening their game or heightening their severity or their seriousness, which, patrol maybe not was capable of handling at the time.
Absolutely. Body armor from head to toe, as a matter of fact.
Oh.
And it was actually the Los Angeles Police Department SWAT team that was finally able, they were training nearby. They were able to get there somewhat in a timely manner. But they were the ones who finished off the incident.
So coming in with the special weapons and the tactics to help bring it to a peaceful resolution to, make the city safe.
Yes.
So a little bit of history of the SWAT team. So you mentioned earlier that it's an all-voluntary team. It's a part-time team. And you applied early on in your career for the selection process. So what is the selection process for the team?
Well, it starts with applying to the team, and typically that's just a notification that goes up on what we call the patrol board. You put your name down. There's a list of instructions that have a date, a time, and what equipment you need. And then we basically show up on that day for the selection course. And, that course includes a pretty rigorous physical exam, an extremely difficult firearms qualification test, and a board with the current team members and leadership. And that's in summary. It's a long day. It's a very difficult test, and we don't share the specific details of the test because we want it to be a surprise for newcomers. But it is a very detailed, very intense list of tests and qualifications that each member has to pass.
So not to give away the secrets of the selection process, but when you say physical exam, there's a portion of that where there's some running.
Yes.
There's some physical exertion, wearing some of the equipment, some of the heavy equipment that the team carries, coupled with trying to mimic some of the stressful situations they're put in, coupled with shooting while under stressful conditions to help mimic stressful shooting to make sure that they can perform in stressful situations. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 100% pass, right?
It is. It's 100% pass, and we do put things in place that make it very uncomfortable for a newcomer. For instance, a portion of the firearms qualification requires them to shoot with a gas mask on. Maybe very new for some people. You don't get a whole lot of that prior to, maybe a little bit in the academy. But it's just it's one of those things that we can turn up some pressure on them, make it a little bit more uncomfortable, and see how they perform under those circumstances.
So for the listeners, the gas mask is it's needed to go into an area that has some type of exposure to chemicals or some situation where you need to wear a gas mask, but it also restricts your breathing. And when you're breathing very hard and your pulse rate is up, and then you put something, much like breathing through a straw or a snorkel, and then having to focus on your front sight and shooting, it really tests the mettle of what the SWAT team members are trying to accomplish to make sure that they're not going to fold when things get rough.
Yeah. One important point on it too is everything is timed, but the applicant doesn't know what the time is. They're basically told, hey, if you're moving at a pace that you're comfortable, you're probably not making the time. But without knowing that time limit, it really pushes people, which we want to see. And the times are pretty, constricted. So they do got to move. They got to be in great shape. Basic. We're not there to teach them basic, weapon safety and marksmanship. They should be at a level where they're above proficient or at a above proficiency level before they come there.
So it's an evaluation, not a training.
Correct.
So you mentioned there's a third portion of that, which is like what I would constitute basically an oral board where they're asked questions. And what is the reason or the goal for that?
Mainly, again, there's a pressure aspect of it when you're, most of the applicants are newer deputies on the department, but when you're sitting in front of an entire SWAT team, that kind of turns up the pressure. It's good to see how people react to that. And we have a list of questions that have been around as long as I've been here, 20 plus years, probably a lot longer, probably toward the origins of our team. And it's just to get to know the guys. We ask some very specific questions to get a sense of their dedication, whether it's, reacting to a situation day or night. We want to know, hey, are you that type of person or willing to, get out at 3 o'clock in the morning, say goodbye to your family and head out to whatever incident you're being called to. So, mostly just to get to know the applicant a little bit better and see what kind of communication skills they have. And, one big aspect of being on the team is whether they're going to be a fit for our team. And a lot of that is personality as well.
So you're not looking for, basically the most fit or the best shooter. You're looking for the person who will work well in a team, has good decision-making qualities, and, to put it, bluntly, the right person. You don't have to be the most fit. You don't have to be the most, the best marksman, but just a right fit for the team and the team environment where you're supported and you support those around you.
Absolutely. To back up a little bit as far as decision making, and I won't get into exactly what the incidents are, but we have a certain number of scenarios that an applicant has to go through. They're real life scenarios where they might be instructed, hey, open that door, enter that room, and deal with whatever in front of you. And it could be a hostage situation, it could be a fight, it could be a nothing. Right, and we want to see how they react and what they do when they enter. Sometimes, using what we call a simunition gun, you utilize a real weapon, but it fires basically like a wax bullet. Think of a paintball gun on steroids type of thing. They'll be armed with one of those, and again, sometimes they'll walk into a hostage situation. Sometimes they'll walk into a room and we'll start opening fire on them. Sometimes it's a nothing situation. It really picks up the stress levels and it gives us a good idea of how these people handle high stress.
How they handle high stress and react appropriately to what they're given, which is, very key to a SWAT operator or SWAT team member.
Correct. And those scenarios usually, or they do come right after the intense physical aspect of the test. So they kind of go into it a little bit wore out and kind of stressed out already.
That's outstanding. So you have the initial selection process, the 3-part we talked about, and then the police officer standard training has a core competency list for the ongoing training. Can you speak to what the team trains on, either monthly or what they're required to maintain proficiency in?
Yeah, there is a very large list of tasks that we train on. To kind of summarize it, I'll break it down so it's a little bit simpler to understand. But we can start with high-risk warrant service, something that we do quite a lot of. And then secondly, what we call a barricade situation. Those are probably our 2 primary tasks that we do the most of. Mm-hmm. But then you get into all kinds of, other tasks that we could be faced with, such as, like I said, a hostage situation. Something that, over the course of the history of, our department and the nation, for that matter, doesn't happen every day. And, the question would be asked, hey, why do you spend so much time practicing a hostage rescue event if it, hardly ever happens? Well, in this world, that would be our most difficult task that we would have to do. You talk about very dynamic situation where, SWAT team members are entering, whether it's a building or a room, where you have maybe one or more bad guys that are armed. They don't have any rules. We have to worry about the hostages. We have to be accountable for every single thing we do, and that requires a level of training that is very intensive.
Yeah, and I imagine so the high risk, the high risk that we talk about and low frequency. There's no margin or very little margin for error in that. So, making sure that the team is ready if and when it happens. That's not something you can brush up real quick while you're waiting, for things to transpire. And I think you make a good point of also that the hostage negotiation, the hostage rescue portion of that encompasses basic SWAT movement. So yes, you're doing a hostage rescue, but you're also incorporating, room clearing. You're also incorporating, decision making. So the end outcome might be a hostage rescue, but it still draws upon basic SWAT tactics that you can train on, where it's a hostage rescue, whether it's a warrant service clearance. It's basically the same until it's not.
Yeah, of course. I mean, things you would never think about. How do we set ourselves up in a vehicle? Right. It seems like you wouldn't, never even be a topic. But when you have, 16 guys with lots of equipment, that matters. How do you get out of the vehicle? How do you move from the vehicle to a doorway? Going through the doorway, negotiating doors, hallways, big rooms, small rooms. Yes, that type of training encompasses all that stuff. So we are rehearsing what we do on a day-to-day basis.
So specifically for a hostage rescue, and I imagine it's not just there's a hostage, let's go in there. Crisis negotiation team, is that part of the SWAT team?
It's a component of what we call the CRU, the Critical Response Unit. So it is part of our team, but they are also a separate entity.
So when the crisis response unit gets dispatched or mission tasked, both are dispatched at the same time. They have their mission and their what they're responsible for, while the SWAT team's doing something simultaneously. And that's something we'll entertain at another podcast. I just want to make sure that we outline that, our crisis response unit, CRU, SWAT team rolls with our hostage negotiator, or crisis negotiator team from the onset. We don't wait to call them out.
Of course, every incident that we deploy on, they're recalled as well, and they're actually, you can call them our first line of action for de-escalating situations. They have, highly trained individuals that are specifically trained, to speaking with suspects and trying to de-escalate situations, getting people to surrender, everything they can, everything in their wheelhouse to bring a situation to a close. So in many cases, they've been very successful where, the SWAT team is there, but we end up never deploying because they're successful in, de-escalating and getting a situation to close peacefully.
And while you guys train, you guys meaning the SWAT team train, that's the hope of every SWAT team member, is it, the suspect surrenders peacefully. And I think it's a good point to point out for the listeners that, law enforcement has 50% and I heard this at a training one time, we have 50% of the decision making on the scene. The suspect has the other 50%. We offer de-escalation. We offer, peaceful resolutions. It's their responsibility to accept. So while we're trying our best to come to 51 plus 1% to get their compliance, it's also, falls upon, their mentality and what their intent to do.
Absolutely. Going back, I had brought up the point of a barricaded suspect as one of the tasks that we deploy pretty frequently on. But yeah, of course, we want that person to come out peacefully, surrender. They, like you said, they do have a vote in that. All we can hope for is that the CNT team, the crisis negotiations team, can get a hold of that person, talk them out peacefully. But if that doesn't work, of course, we are there to contain and try our end.
So you talked a little bit about loading into the car, what the stack is, if you will, moving through the door and moving through the house. What are some of the special positions, on the team? Most people might know breacher or the sniper team, but what are some of the other characteristics or characters that play a specific role, not only on the special weapons and tactics, but then an additional responsibility for, enhanced duties?
Right. So, kind of looking at a team from the top down, you have the team commander, which is my position. We have a senior team leader, and we have an assistant team leader. So, kind of a bird's eye view looking down. I'm looking at the entire incident kind of from a overhead. And then I have two team leaders that are actually controlling and leading the SWAT team on the ground. Within that SWAT team, you have breachers. Breachers are specifically trained team members to get into areas, get through doors, anything that's fortified, any kind of structure that we need to get into or overcome. We have a breaching team, and within the breaching team, they have a whole bunch of specialties within that team: manual breaching, explosive breaching, vehicle breaching. There's all kinds of sets in there. We have our scout sniper team. It's part of our SWAT team, but they also operate on their own if need be. That's a smaller group within the team, but again, it requires a lot more specially trained schools and continuous training to be on that team. When people hear that term, sometimes there's a cringe, but they're basically our intelligence gathering unit, or what we call our scout team. A lot of times they'll go out ahead of us, look at places, get an idea of the layout. And they're specially trained, of course, in taking precision shots. We have, what we'll call our technology guys, individuals who are trained to fly and use drones, deploy robots, things of that nature. We have intelligence people, usually guys who have been detectives who can research individuals or places and get a whole bunch of information. Or whatever information that's out there, they'll find it. And then there's a bunch of other subsections such as chemical agents. We have a number of chemical munitions at our disposal that are used in very certain circumstances. But again, another section that requires specially trained personnel. We have individuals that are trained in ropes, rappelling, ascending, things of that nature. So you can go down the list, and there's a bunch more specialized aspects within the team.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned there's the team leader, there's a senior team leader and assistant team leader, which I would imagine while you're on scene of a major incident, having that direction and control to provide messaging both down to all the troops so everybody knows, their situational awareness is on par, as well as bringing information up the chain to the command staff such as yourself to help, again, having the most up-to-date information and making sure everybody's operating on the same playing field with the same information. So lots of subsets on the team, lots of specialty training going on, lots of mandated from POS, the police officer standard and training. So we're training. We're making sure that we're proficient. We're making sure that, we're up to the task. How many times do we get called out a year?
It depends year to year. I'll say pretty historically anywhere from 8 to 12 call outs per year.
And when we're talking 8 to 12 call outs, that may not necessarily mean there's an active situation going on, but there might be a high risk search warrant. So it could be a mixture of active incidents or, evolving incidents and, pre-planned SWAT high risk missions. So let's dive into that a little bit. So there's basically two types of SWAT missions, and correct me if I'm wrong. There's the active incident where somebody is doing something right now at this moment that requires SWAT to be activated, and then there's the planned incident. And each one of those have some different characteristics as far as planning, and go ahead and walk through those. Let's start with the active incident.
Right. So an active incident, like you said, anything that happens day or night. It could be, patrol for instance, is at a crime scene, whether it's a domestic or maybe a robbery, whatever may happen, and they have a suspect, and the suspect barricades himself into a residence. Again, that happens pretty frequently on our terms. That would be an unplanned event where, the patrol supervisor will make the notification to myself, give me the details of, hey, we have a subject barricaded in the house. We know him to be armed. Here's the scenario. And I will make that call whether the team's going to be deployed to that scene or not. That's basically where an unplanned event starts. And then you look at a planned event where, let's say the detectives are working a case, they develop a search warrant for stolen property, and a little bit of history tells them that, hey, we've had problems at this place before. The primary suspect has a violent history. They do a check on him. He has firearms, in his possessions. There's a number of things that we'll look at when we're going to serve a search warrant like that, and we can get into the threat matrix. But if it meets a certain threshold, myself again will do another evaluation, and we'll decide whether the team is necessary to serve that warrant. But again, that would be a planned event where we have the time to really sit down and dig into an event and make sure there's no aspect of the situation that we're not sure of.
So going back to that active incident, like you're talking about, one of those questions you mentioned, are you dedicated to the team? And there's something to be said about it's, pouring rain, cold outside, 3:00 in the morning, had little sleep because of shift work, and now you're calling me to come out to go, who knows how long. That takes a special individual to answer that call, one, and say, yes, I'll put my gear on and come out and, like you said, kiss the family, and I'll see you when we're done. I think it's, one of the things we don't want to skip over is the family on these, where we go out, the SWAT team goes out specifically, and, when you're going to be home when it's done. It's not a 9-to-5 job. It's done when it's done, and we take as much time as we need to get it done peacefully.
Absolutely.
So going to the planned incident, of the two, if I looking at these and listening to you speak, if I had a choice, I'd rather have the planned incident than the active incident. It seems like the active incident, we're paying catch up to some degree of, finding out who it is, what they're doing, where they're at, as opposed to the planned incident where we are, we're I don't want to say dictating, but we're choosing what time. We're making sure that there's no, buses running, or there's, choosing a time that's more advantageous to us than a random time that the suspect decides to go on a rampage.
Absolutely. I would put it, much of what you just said, but time is the big difference. When you have a planned event, it could be a day, it could be up to a week. It just depends on the incident. But when you have the time to really look into all the details, do the scouting, really plan where everybody's going to be, calling in extra bodies, extra help, so you have more than enough people, versus, hey, this thing just kicked off. We need you guys here now. It's not that we're not going to plan that incident. We're going to plan once we get there. On very few circumstances, you may have to go, but that's pretty far and few between where you go. But it's a different environment. You're not sitting in a briefing room looking at a chalkboard where everybody has a good idea of what's going on. It's kind of on the fly. So yeah, obviously a pre-planned event, it's typically safer for everybody, and just better planning, better result. And
you mentioned something that's really key, is making sure that we have the right amount of people on board. I know that your SWAT team, or the Calaveras SWAT team, trains very well with our local surrounding agencies. So if we need to call in, additional resources to help with the perimeter and containment, we have that ability specifically on a planned event, unplanned also, but a planned event for sure. And I just want to make sure the listeners understand, when we talked about the threat matrix, that the use of a SWAT team is taken very seriously, and there's several levels of checks and balances to ensure that their deployment or their use is worthy of, the situation at hand. We just don't deploy them, because we haven't had a call for a while. So we're just going to deploy them today because this, we need some practice. It's taken very seriously, and there's times where we won't use them because it doesn't meet the threat matrix.
Yes, absolutely. You can almost look at it as somewhat of a scorecard.
Okay.
So there'll, when we're doing a workup on a case to see whether the team is going to be used or not, there's a number of criteria that has to be there for us to deploy. And again, I touched on it briefly, but we'll look at, history of those involved, violence, weapons, what kind of fortifications, for instance, they may have. I won't go into all the details, but there's a pretty detailed list, and certain criteria have to be met for us to use the team.
And while you're doing that threat matrix, there's also people, you mentioned the intelligence gathering. Are there dogs? Are there kids? Can we wait till he leaves the house or she leaves the house? Or, what's the best way to handle this? And, that works into the threat matrix coupled with the tactical plan. And then coupled with, do we need mutual aid, and planning for that, making sure that time's not a factor where we can rotate teams if it's a barricade subject for a long time, where we'll wait them out. There's no more, it's 6 hours we go in and we wait them out until, it's appropriate to go in. So when you talked about prioritizing threats and critical incidents, what are the three areas that you kind of really look at most for when you're developing critical incident matrix or threat matrix or incident plans?
Well, primarily life, protection of life, property, and containing the incident. Those are our three priorities that will, always put life at the top of our list, preservation of life, and again, property and containment.
So it's interesting that property is over containment because, I know this is not set in stone, but the containment is important because, you mentioned a barricaded subject. If they take a hostage and go mobile, making sure that they're contained and they can't, affect anybody else in the community. We had a recent incident where somebody was in a canyon where we did not want him to get out of that unpopulated canyon into a populated area. So making sure that containment is on point is really a really key issue to those life, property, and containment. Those three priorities that you talk about.
Absolutely.
So you've been on SWAT for several years now, with the department for even longer. What are some of the most memorable operation or incidents that have a significant impact on the team or yourself or how we operate?
Yes, looking back at the start of our conversation, I talked about dedication and how, dedication is a top component from individuals that we're looking for. There was a somewhat recent incident in the Murphys area where we had gone through all of the things that we have already talked about. We had a unplanned event where an individual was armed. There was a domestic incident that happened, and when patrol deputies got there, basically they were able to convey that, hey, the victim was able to escape from the house, but the suspect is inside and he's armed, heavily armed, and we have the place surrounded. So basically, we, at that point, that SWAT team was deployed, and to get into the actual incident, when it was all said and done, I was deploying chemical agents into the house, and the suspect inside the house targeted me with a shotgun, 12-gauge shotgun. And at first shot, I really didn't know he was targeting me. And it was actually a SWAT team member behind me, good buddy of mine as well, that actually grabbed me, got up, put himself in major harm's way, and pulled me down to the ground and actually dragged me behind a pile of dirt and was kind of like, hey, you idiot, he's shooting at you. And if he didn't pull me down, after the fact, I saw that the tree that I was standing behind got hit by a 12-gauge round. If he didn't pull me down, I think there's a pretty good chance that I would have gotten shot. And it was pretty level with my upper body and face area. That's obviously memorable to me because it really enforced the teamwork and membership on that team. It's a special place, and guys do special things like that on this team. Putting yourself in harm's way to save someone else is pretty special.
Yeah, that don't think that could be understated. That's special. I mean, you're focused on doing your job. You got a task. You can't just shoot blindly into the house with your chemical munitions. So you're focused on that, and they make a little bit of a noise, and so you're doing what you need to do. And for somebody to to expose themselves, meaning from behind cover, to help save you. Not that you couldn't save yourself, but you just didn't see the threat. That's that special teamwork to bring it back to the selection process. Are you gonna wake up at 3:00 in the morning when it's cold and raining? Are you gonna put yourself in harm's way for somebody else or yourself, to rescue somebody? A lot of times people say yes, but when the rubber meets the road, having that demonstration of the selflessness to stand up and take those actions. I just want to make sure that we recognize that, and that can't be understated. And that teamwork and that bond where there's something special to be said, where everybody's out, everybody's tired, everybody's cold, but we have a mission and we have a task to do that's very important. We're not looking at our clocks. We're not looking at when do I get to go home, or when's the coffee coming, or whatever. We're looking at each other to make sure we're all safe, and that I just, again, can't be understated enough.
Absolutely.
And then drilling those, having that incident and drilling that into the new members to make sure that they're very aware of what we're expecting as a department, as a community, from our citizens, and as a team member, what we would expect. This is the type of stuff we expect. And we do a fair amount. Our department does a fair amount of neighborhood watch and community engagements. We always hear, "Oh, this is Calaveras. It's so, it's so nice. It's so peaceful." And we start talking about, what really happens, at night, and what our SWAT team and what really our daily deputies deal with, and our correctional officers and dispatchers, everybody deals with on a daily basis. It's really eye-opening, and I'm glad we're able to talk about this to help bring some light. You talked about a barricaded subject. We've had that. You talked about a barricaded subject with the hostage. We've had that the last few years. You talked about your situation where you were shot at. We've had deputies shot at, down in Lower Jenny Lind. It's not common, but it's not uncommon either in Calaveras, and I think it's important for people to know that.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about these stressful situations, and they're not frequent, but they frequent our county. What are some of the, how do you handle, or how do you, portray or get people to, deal with the psychological and physical stress, during the high stakes situations for your team and yourself? What are some of the things we use?
Well, beyond training is something that will really improve any kind of issues that you may have. But again, if someone's having problem, we'll first turn to the team. It's the team is so tight, both as on a professional level and on friendship levels. It's pretty easy to see if someone's having some issues, and we have a number of things in place that deputies or the entire team can use, for that matter. Peer support is one of them. Where guys can reach out, or gals can reach out to our peer support people, and within that realm, they have all kinds of support that people can use to help them out with issues. But the bottom line is really, if someone's having issues with anything, and they ask for help, they're going to get a good amount of help, or any amount of help that they need. And we have a number of things in place to do that.
Yeah, I know as the year's gone on, we've done a lot better job of making sure that during the debriefing process, there's the tactical debrief, and then there's other debriefing where we bring in specialists through peer support, county resources, to help guys and gals talk through what happened. And, like you said, having a tight team is being able to recognize the change in behavior that some people may not even know that they're displaying, and just being able, like you said, reaching up and grabbing you while you're getting shot is the same thing. Saving somebody's life is reaching out and saying, "Hey, looks like, can I help you? Can I talk to you?" Reaching out if they're having some, emotional issues, which is, it's really reassuring that, again, small Calaveras County, back in 2015, the Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing, gave out the 6 pillars for law enforcement, and one of them, or number 6, was officer wellness and safety, and getting it to be more normal for law enforcement to have debriefing sessions or reaching out when they need help. We now know that it's not a single, magnanimous event that could cause some traumatic stress. It could be a culmination of a lot of little, or death by 1,000 cuts, if you will. But having that special bond of the team, I think that's one of the things you cannot replicate, to make sure that not only everybody's held accountable during training. Are you shooting straight? Are you physically fit? But are you mentally ready to go? And if you're not, we're there for you. Absolutely.
A great example of that is one of our team members recently was shot through the arm, and this happened in San Andreas not too long ago. But incident like that, a major wound, terrific guy, and was ready to go, ready to roll right after getting out of the hospital. Didn't say, hey, I need a few days, wanted to get right back into it. Well, knowing that, hey, this individual just went through something, terribly, terribly stressful, painful. I mean, shot right through the arm. Maybe he doesn't need peer support or any kind of, direct assistance like that, but we're still going to get together as a team and, maybe have a barbecue with the family and friends and just be with him. And, maybe even though he's not asking for help, it's going to help him, because you don't get through an incident like that without having some sort of issue. Right? And I think that's where the senior leadership, such as yourself on the team, and the senior assistant team leader and, the team leaders, that's where they need to step in and say, not make a problem where there's a problem, but just, shed some mentoring on them, like, hey, this is big. Let's make sure we take the right steps. Let's surround our people and make sure that they're supported. Maybe this doesn't affect him now, maybe, 10 years down the road or something, but he'll have that guidance from our senior staff to say, hey, this is the right way to mitigate what you might be going through, as opposed to, hey, see you next week, Bill, or whatever, we'll see you, suck it up and move on. And I think we're well past that. 100%. And that is the key to leadership on a team like this is, not only ensure that, the group has the training and equipment that they need, but, that's just part of it. But, the biggest component to a team like this is not, the specialized weapons or equipment. It's the individual. And if the individual is not at 100%, operating capacity, then the whole team is not. So that is very critical, and it's something that we monitor always. That's a good point. We talk about special weapons and tactics, but you can have the highest speed gear, the most top notch, electronics, but if there's not somebody there operating it, it's functionally useless. Absolutely. So we talked a lot about the selection process, some of the calls for service and the some of the things you need to maintain proficiency on. This always cracks me up. What are some misconceptions about SWAT teams that you want to clarify? Well, probably the biggest one is the Rambo military image that SWAT teams are labeled with, especially after the year 2020. We had a whole bunch of stuff come out in the media saying, hey, do we really need militarized, quotes, teams in our neighborhoods? That would probably be my biggest pet peeve. And to understand that, some of the much of the equipment is similar. There's only a certain amount of equipment that we can use for safety. The helmets are very similar. The body armor that we wear are very similar. So I understand the image is there, but being a veteran of the armed forces myself, and at least half of the team is also veterans, I can tell you from my experience, it's like night and day. Some of the core aspects of the military are the same. We're looking for disciplined and control, things of that nature. But the mission, our life, our mission is life saving. We're not a military unit that's going to roll in somewhere and just destroy something. It's 100% the opposite. So that would be my biggest image of SWAT teams that I wish would change. Yeah, you bring up a good point about the Rambo. He makes for a great movie.
filmed in British Columbia. Hope British Columbia. It was a great movie. Everybody enjoyed it, but that's not what SWAT is. And this SWAT TV show, and the old one and the new one, and the movies, and makes it very, very sexy to some of the stuff that they do is you kind of watch it and like, okay, that's kind of cool, but that's not even close to what we do. But you mentioned military equipment, and I think we just touch on that for a minute. We have a tactical vehicle at our office that was built by a commercial. It's a commercial vehicle. It's a F550 platform. We call it the Bearcat. That's a manufacturer by Lenco. And it's often people refer to it, and they refer to it as a tank. Or I saw a tank going down the road, and a bunch of guys behind it in military gear. Again, talking to a lot of people, they say, well, why do we need that in Calaveras? Can you kind of touch on what, how that's already helped us? We had an incident down, Lower Jenny Lind. Maybe touch upon, how that tactical vehicle with its armor capability helped the team in that situation.
Yeah, again, it's an armored vehicle. It's a bullet resistant vehicle.
Nothing's bulletproof.
Yeah, nothing's 100%. But yeah, it's a large armored vehicle that the majority of the team can get into. So size one is why we have it. Secondly, to get us close into areas, whether, like you said, it's a pre-planned event where we need to get close to a house or building or what have you, and there's no cover out there, we can stay within that vehicle and remain pretty safe. As a matter of fact, recently there's been 2 incidents where, again, these were, there was one planned event, one non-planned event. Long story short, the SWAT team came under fire from individuals barricaded inside with AR-15 type weapons. On one occasion, the Bearcat, our armored vehicle, was hit in the windshield right where the driver was behind. If it was a regular vehicle, that 5.56 caliber round would have most definitely hit the driver in the upper body or head. Against another incident that happened, same type of thing. We had a barricaded individual start shooting a AR-15 through a window at us, and luckily our guys were within our armored vehicles, and it kept them from getting subjected to that hostile fire. And just to back up a little bit, talking about military equipment and stuff like that. The military has actually turned to law enforcement tactics overseas during, the last portion of the war on terror. We have progressed into what we call a surround and call out tactic, where the military also went to that because they were looking at us. Basically, they were moving from doing dynamic entries into a building overseas because a lot of our service members were getting seriously injured or killed, moving too fast, and they start looking to what SWAT teams were doing, and a lot of same circumstances, right? Military's going after a high-value target overseas. Why are we going to rush in there and grab them when we can surround the place and call that individual out to us? It's worth a try. So a lot of the tactics that were established in law enforcement, the military start using. I think the impression out there a lot is, hey, this is a lot of wannabe military, or we're trying to mimic military action. No, it's completely different and separate. And like I said, they're actually using some of our tactics.
So the military, and this is news, I haven't heard anything about this. So the military is using time and distance, much like law enforcement is for maybe not de-escalation for the military, but what's the safest way to do it? And the T part of SWAT is the tactics, and being part of the team as you have been for so many years. You talked about the evolution from the dynamic to the surround and call out, making it more safe, using chemical encouragement, if you will, to make things safer for not only the suspect community but the officers. And it's interesting that the military is starting to swing that way towards a less dynamic, I guess, as we'll call it.
Yeah, less dynamic is a good term. From the early 2000s, when I first came on the team to looking to today, we're looking at 19 years, and the transformation in tactics with the end result of being, hey, how could we do this safer, is like night and day. 19, 20 years ago, everything was very quick. We thought our speed created safety. And, in some situations that may apply, but for the majority, if time is on our side, why are we going to rush into a place and, put innocent people inside, next door, or in the community at danger when, we can dictate the situation with time.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, being on the team so long. I just want to make sure that, and you talked about it earlier about the inception of teams. Really want to make sure that, the originators of the Calaveras County SWAT team are recognized. A lot of the ones that, first raised their hand to say, yes, we'll be part of that SWAT team. When I remember them driving around in a, 3-speed van that, had difficulty going uphill, and they're, while today we're rolling up to houses with, bullet resistant vehicles, they were really the forefront, and, standing on the shoulders of our giants that came before us. So if any of you are listening, I don't want to start naming names because I will forget somebody, and I don't want any hard feelings, but just want to make sure that we recognize the history that you started, that's being continued with the effort to save lives and make things more safe for the community. So I just want to make sure we pause right here just to let them know thank you, and appreciate you setting the groundwork for larger things to come.
Absolutely. Still in contact with some of the original plank owners, and we typically have a yearly barbecue somewhere, and it's good to see the original team members show up. They try and make it as much as they can, but hearing their stories and how things have changed is pretty awesome, especially for the newer guys to hear and see how things have moved.
Yeah, a lot of those guys were, rappelling on ropes I wouldn't hang my clothesline on, but they're, the equipment they had in the olden days, if you will.
Yeah.
So speaking of equipment, and evolving tactics, what are some of the newest things that are coming out that are either helping SWAT teams or you hope to help SWAT teams in the near future?
Well, drones is, by far the biggest technology advance that we've seen, along with robots. But I would definitely put drones at the top of that. We've used them heavily. We've used other departments in the mutual aid component heavily to get us through some pretty difficult situations. The use of drones was really the make or break point for some major operations. So drones, and I said robots, when we can send a robot into a house or structure with, video capability on it, it's definitely better than, sending a individual team member inside. So things like that, anytime we can use technology to our advantage and keep everybody involved safer, we're going to do that. And it's something that we're always evaluating, testing, and seeing if something new comes out, we'll give it a shot, we'll test it. If it's going to help us out, we'll try to acquire it. So technology has brought us leaps and bounds as far as what can we put in place to offset, putting a human being in that position to make things safer for everybody.
That's a good point. Putting a drone in place or a robot in place of a human being, on some level, it almost de-escalates the situation. So if I'm a suspect and I see a robot come in that it's not obviously armed or anything, or a drone come into a house, I'm going to take that as less of a threat than a SWAT team member coming in, with their gear on. It's going to, have a less of a reaction, I would imagine. And then you brought up drones in some of our recent incidents, not only monitoring what suspects are doing in all, day or night, being able to deliver things to them, such as, a phone that our CNT team can use, or just monitoring them so we can give them, again, the time and distance so they feel like they have an appropriate time to make the right decision and end up coming to the decision we want them to come to, which is surrendering.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier, we're coming to the close of this, you mentioned earlier that, you had no idea about Calaveras, or you had no intention of, targeting Calaveras to be a employee or a deputy sheriff. What advice would you give to aspiring law enforcement officers that you've learned through the years? What would you tell them?
Well, first and foremost, not like in my case, do a little bit of research.
Mm-hmm.
If you're into certain things, like I said at the start, I enjoy hunting, fishing, camping. I like being in the outdoors. This place really worked out for me. I live, in a rural Angels camp, and I never want to leave that place. I didn't know that coming in. I would have felt a lot better if I did a little bit of research, so that would be the main thing. And again, if you're someone who's thinking about coming, to our department, or any department, remember why you want to do this, right? I mean, what's your reasoning for doing this? The bottom line, it should be because you want to help your community. You want to, help other people. In recent years, I think, there's been certain incidents where, law enforcement, kind of got a bad name here and there. And I think it's very important for everybody to remember, hey, why you want to get into this job? It should be to help out your community, help out your fellow man.
That's a good point, helping out your community, and especially if you live in it, you kind of have skin in the game where, you're out patrolling at night to make it safer because, this is where your family is, this is where your friends and neighbors are, and rather than just all, not going to name departments, but I'll just commute an hour and a half to somewhere, do a job in a community and come home. But when you live in the community that you police, you're going to see these people at the grocery store, you're going to see them again, and just being embedded as a, part of the community as opposed to policing the community. That's a really, really good point. And I would just add, if you're interested in law enforcement, go after higher education. I think it's important that our modern law enforcement have some type of higher education. And if you're going to look into Calaveras, maybe do a couple ride-alongs. Do you have any specific things that you'd want to reach out to, maybe somebody like in your situation with prior military experience that would differ from that?
No, I mostly agree with all that. Kind of the route I took coming out of the military was to finish my college. And I did that. And like you said, it definitely helped me out everywhere from getting into the academy. Military gave me a few points, and then having a college bachelor's degree gave me a few points. So I was already kind of on top of, the competition coming in. And, going to college before, you're just going to get more experience, learn some stuff, grow up a little bit, and then put in for it. And again, the military, it worked great for me. If that's something you're interested in, I think coming into law enforcement after that experience is great. Not that we're any better. I don't want to come off like that, but I've seen a lot of the veterans progress very well in law enforcement.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, getting some life experience. It doesn't necessarily have to be going to a 4-year school, even maybe a junior college, or even going to the military. Some people need to go to the military or should go to the military. It benefits them to instill the discipline and the work ethic. And then once you've matured, coming out of that into a like career or similar career, such as law enforcement, I think that's, you made a good point. I didn't mean to say that, colleges was the only way, but it's a way. And it's important for veterans to know that, our doors open and law enforcement doors are open. They're similar but different, as well as, the continuing education that, we're always evolving, always learning.
Yep.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I think we covered most of it. Being on the SWAT team has been the best part of my career so far. And, I've got maybe a year or so left on it, and then we're going to pass on the reins. But, that's why I came in, and it's what I love most about this profession.
Pass the torch, but maintain visual.
Yep.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Calaveras Behind the Badge. We appreciate your engagement and hope you found the information valuable. Remember, your feedback and topic suggestions are always welcome as we strive to address issues that matter most to our community. Stay safe, and we look forward to connecting with you soon.